Hello, this is Edward here from ChargeCore Studio, and today we're going to be looking at how to do arrays in VB.NET. This is the second episode of the series, so let's get started. To declare an array in VB.NET is a fairly simple process. There are probably like 2 or 3 different ways of doing this. One of the most simple ways to do it, if you sort of know the size when you're declaring the array, is to do it using our standard dim public or private statement and then the name of the array, so array of nums is my case, and then you say in brackets you put the number of elements in the array and then declare your data type, which I spoke about last week, so as integer in this case. The alternative way of doing it is sort of dim array of strings, let's say, as string, and then put parentheses afterwards. The issue with just going with that is that when you go to assign a value to array of strings equals hello, because when you say, obviously you need to specify an integer indexer in normal brackets like that, is you get this error, object reference not set to an instance of an object, null reference exception. Basically what that's saying is you're trying to assign something to an array before it's been properly initialized. In order to initialize the array, you have to give it a size, and because we haven't given it a size, obviously, so you can't just type in here 10, because then it gives you a different error that says array bounds cannot appear in type specifiers. So what you do is you say equals and then open bracket, and then you type in your hello, comma, and separate each thing. It will automatically start at the index of 0 unless you feed that a blank and then go into here and type hello in there like that, comma, and then so on and so forth. I'm going to just to show you how to assign values. When it comes to assigning values to the array, you can do it as I showed you before. If you try and use the construct like this, it won't let you, because you specified the size there, and again you get this other different type of error. Sorry, I just realised I left my program running. Explicit initialization is not permitted for arrays declared with explicit bounds. That's just basically saying, because you've already said that it's that size, you can't then do it like that. So in order to assign values to our array, what we then have to do is array of nums and then specify the index, so 0 equals 1, then a different index equals 2, and so on and so forth. And that is also how you would change the variables on a even if you declared it like I showed you using the other method. That's how you change the values in your array when you're running your actual program, rather than just declaring the array. Obviously this is all happening in the main sub anyway, and it's not a global variable up here. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about arrays. I'm going to come back to arrays after I've shown you the other thing, which is iteration. Iteration is basically doing the same code over and over again under the same or possibly different conditions. It's that thing might sound a bit complex. It's easier when you're actually programming it to actually get to understand it. So let's get started with our good old friend the do loop. So as you can see, that's automatically inserted the loop keyword at the end there to close off the loop. So basically what will happen when I run this program is it will keep repetitively, unconditionally doing the same code over and over again all the time the program's running, basically. So it's kind of a bit like a while true loop. So if I just close off that, as you can see, this will just basically spam the console with hello, 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 over and over again. So as far as sort of programming goes, that's not going to be sort of particularly useful unless you're like very badly coding a game or get a game or something and you sort of want that to run the in-game loop, but even then you probably still have some sort of condition. So you try and avoid sort of infinite loops in general sort of coding, unless you're doing like server programming or something, but even then you've got some sort of condition. So what happens if you want a condition? Well, you've sort of got two main choices here, and that is sort of do until, which will do something until your condition which you specify and check becomes true, or do while, which is doing something all the time a condition is true, and when it becomes false then it will terminate. So aside from that, there isn't a really great deal of difference between these two different types of loops, so it's just sort of like whichever's easiest to whichever one you sort of prefer. And you can use, it's not like a choice that you make as to whether or not you're going to be a do until person or a do while person. You use sort of whichever lends itself best to the situation. So do until, if we just declare us, you're going to need sort of some sort of another variable in order to sort of get this to work. So dim I as integer. Do until I equals 10, and then console.writeLine count. No, not count, sorry. Do until I equals I, sorry. And then obviously, so you increment it up so it doesn't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. I plus equals 1. That's how you increment in VB. It's not a plus plus like you do in most other languages. So then we shall reset our variable here. I equals 0. Do while I equals 10. Sorry, while I is smaller than 10. Because if we say do while I equals 10, obviously that's going to evaluate as false and it'll just skip over the loop. So console.writeLine I, and then I plus equals 1. Or you can do I equals I plus 1, but I prefer that just because it's a shorter thing. So then that's obviously going to count up to 9, terminate, and then close. And as you can see, I didn't leave a console.readline in the end there, so I didn't get to see it properly. Yeah, as you can see, that counts from 0 to 9. Now, say for instance we sort of want to make sure that our code evaluates at least once, regardless of whether or not the condition that we're using to check to whether or not to do the next loop. So I'm just trying to think of an example of when you might sort of actually need this. I can't think of one right now off the top of my head. Leave something in the comments box if you can think of a specific situation. I'd be interested to see what you can come up with. But say we want our code to execute at least once. What we do then is, maybe if we were setting up doing stuff with our variables in the code, you simply just copy and paste or cut and paste this code, and it goes after the loop statement there. So and what you can actually do is, this just sort of shows how the increment sort of thing comes in here as well. If you put your increment above your code and then do it, actually see it counts up to 10, even though it terminates when it gets to 10, and that's because it's being incremented, printed, and then they're checking it. So if we put the loop until up here, it will only go, if we put the incrementer at the bottom, sorry, it would only go up to 9. Okay. The last sort of two loops that there are that you can do in here is those are called for loops. Okay, so in order to make a for loop, it's fairly simple. You just do for, then select your sort of variable identifier. So this is sort of going to keep. This is sort of like the a bit like I was in I being the name, not I as in myself. This is sort of the same role that the variable, the integer that we declared separately, I was doing in do until loops and stuff. So for I as integer equals 0 and then 2, no sorry, 0, that should be 0 to 10 in console dot write line and then I, and you don't need to increment the I at the end of this loop because that's automatically done. When it gets to the next statement, it increments it for you. So as you can see, if I just put a console.readline on the end of this and then run, you can see that counts all the way up to 10 and then stops because it does it for all values between that too. So that doesn't need to be one bigger than when you want it to stop, like in a do loop or whatever. This type of loop is especially useful when you come to look at sort of combining them with arrays. So say we wanted to print out, so say if I just make an integer array, so dim array of int as integer array equals and then 2, 5, 3, 1, 4, and then close that off, then that will construct our array for us. And then if you write array of int and then in brackets your I value, and that will print out in the order that they're in all of our array for us, except for some reason we've got, oh yeah, sorry, that needs to be changed to a 5 because, and then we get, no, why do we get index out of a range exception? Oh, because it's 4, because it's using element 0 in the array. Stop, play. As you can see then it's printed them out, 2, 5, 3, 1 and 4. Okay, but there's sort of like another way you can do this, because that makes sort of indexing of these easier, because you kind of don't always want to have to bother with writing out the specific array that it's going to do inside there. You can do it using this thing called for each loop. So a for each loop is very similar to a standard for loop. It's just for each I, we'll stick with, we won't use I, actually we use element as, and then integer, because in, and then our array name, which is array of int, and then can you see it closes off with the next the same. And this time, instead of sort of using your number as your indexer, is actually saying for every item that's in the array there, and then perform these commands. So if we just did console.writeLine, we can do console.writeLine element, and that's sort of like a bit tidier in terms of how our code is. And in a way I find it sort of easier to understand, and if you're trying to think, okay, what would I be at this point in my code and whatever. And finally is this thing called a dynamic array. This is something which computing students at our college, they haven't actually shown us yet, which sort of leaves a bit of a gap. And that is this thing called a dynamic array, which is basically like an array that can change size depending on sort of like the space needed. So when you create an array of say 100 elements, you're explicitly, although they'll be empty, you're explicitly saying this space is reserved for this array. But if you're trying to do something dynamic, almost like, I don't want to sort of confuse people who are thinking about sort of comp 1 and stuff. Though I suppose it would have made more sense had it been applicable to all the languages that they were doing the course on, to use something called a dynamic array for the deck of cards, because you don't have just like an empty space reserved at the bottom underneath the cards. It's not that the cards aren't actually physically floating. If you're thinking about modelling that as a real life sort of thing, the deck changes size. To declare a dynamic array, and I'll do more on this when I go on to the tutorials for Windows Forms, because that's when it sort of becomes a bit more useful. You do dim, and then your name, which I suppose could be array of ints as, and then there's a thing called an ilist of t, and then of you specify the type. So that would be, in this case, your type is integer. But you can't sort of go from there. As you can see, I'm getting an error, and that's because it's not been initialized. So in order to initialize it, you go equals new list. So this is without the ilist, because ilist I think stands for intelligent list, I'm not sure. But as new list of, and then integer. And addressing and sort of adding in the elements of our array isn't exactly the same. So in order to add an element to our array here, what we do the name of the list dot and then add, and then just specify the integer. So 2, and that should add. Sorry, this is just having a go at me because it's not got things properly working. But that just adds it, and then console.writeLine. In order to access an element inside our array, we do console.writeLine, and then array of ints, and then I believe it's normal brackets and sort of same sort of index. Or if you don't know what the index is going to be, what you can do is do array of ints dot index of, and then specify the item that you're looking for. So index of 2. So that's going. So obviously we need array of ints, and then obviously this function is going to return return the index which we want to think. So that should write out on screen too. Yes. And the good thing about these is that they don't take up loads and loads of memory. So if you're dealing with an array that's sort of could be anywhere between 1 and 1,000 elements long, instead of declaring a massive empty array, you sort of save your memory by doing this, using this method to do it. And I'll talk more about these dynamic arrays in Windows Forms. It just sort of seem to fit in with the arrays and sort of how things work. Okay. The last thing I'm going to show today, because this video is getting quite long, it's probably going to be about 20 minutes long. That is quite a long time for a YouTube video of this style. I'm going to show you how to do a bubble sort using standard arrays. So just sort of for comp 1, just sort of forget about dynamic arrays for now, unless I say maybe how could you optimize the program, say using a dynamic array for deck. That might get you, I don't know, but just sort of ignoring that. For now, we'll go back to standard arrays, and this is going to show you how to do a bubble sort, which is useful if they do get you to order the high scores or the recent scores. Okay, so we're just going to finish off today's section with sort of putting everything we've sort of learnt into sort of practice, into sort of like a first sort of program of sorts that will actually do something in front of us. And some people will know already how to do a bubble sort, because I believe we did it as a class activity at one point. but sort of if you don't, or just as a sort of thing to go over, now sort of the time. I would recommend to anyone sort of who hasn't done a bubble sort before and doesn't have a clue what I mean when I'm talking about a bubble sort to go onto sort of Wikipedia and just kind of look that up. I'll put a link in the description to the article for people who are too lazy to type in bubble sort into Google. Anyway, so as far as doing it in VB is concerned, we're going to use a number of different, we use 3 loops in total, 1 nested loop and then 1 loop which we'll use to write out all of the elements in our array at different stages so you can actually sort of see it working. So we'll start off with an array declaration. It's going to be a global array, global variable, sorry. So we declare it outside here and we'll call it by the name public, why the hell not. Array of ints has integer array equals and then construct, so 4 2 4 1 comma 2 comma 5 comma 3 and just close that off, and so that's going to have maximum index of 4. So we start with a then we need a sort of like a local variable which is dim has swapped as boolean equals false, no, yeah, then do, we'll have our check at the end which is going to be loop until has swapped equals false. Okay, so we then need another loop that will go through and sort of compare every single element inside our array. So for that we're going to use a for loop, for I as integer equals 0 to 4, and then automatically inputs the next statement at the end to close off the loop. So if I'll talk more about ifs and sort of select cases in the next thing when we sort of go in and make a more advanced version of the calculator that we made in episode 1. If array of ints I is greater than, or sorry, is smaller than array of ints I plus 1. Sorry, this should be array of ints dot count. Sorry, this is just making it so that it's -1. So obviously, so we don't get a index out of range exception, because if we had an array of ints dot count, so if we did it for the fixed number of elements, when you plus 1 onto that, you try and access that, it's like that element doesn't exist. So if array of ints I is greater than, first of all we'll say has swapped, sorry, things jumping around, has swapped is going to be equal to true. Then dim temp store, so this is like a temporary store because we're going to swap the 2 values over, so dim temp store as integer equals array of int I. So then array of int I equals array of int I plus 1, and you can do math sort of like inside these brackets, and array of int I plus 1 equals temp store. Okay, and just think, I got everything in there. Yeah, then we need to, obviously at the end of each cycle we want to print out our whole array. I'm going to do that down here. So this is the for each loop, and sort of where it's kind of useful as displaying arrays. For each element as integer in array of ints console.writeLine element, and then at the end of this, after it's sort of done the whole thing, we want it to keep it open so that we can actually read it, console.readLine. So then if we just run our code, we get index out of range exception. Why is that? Oh, I see. So that needs to be -2, I think. And for some reason that's going at immense speed and never stopping. That has swapped equals false. Okay, I'm just going to pause the video and work out why this is doing it, and then I'll explain the changes after I've worked it out. Okay, I will include the final source code in the download as a download link in the description below. The problem was that has swapped equals false wasn't being done at the start of each cycle, so that needs to do that, and I might have changed that. I can't remember whether or not I ended up changing it in the end. I've also inserted a console.writeLine down here to create a break in between each printout of the thing, and as you can see when we run it, it goes from 1, 2, 3, 4. What? Okay, hold on. Yeah, sorry, that is right. The first pass manages to order them in from that to this, so it says 1, 2, 4, 3, 5, so almost there. Then the next pass fixes it, and then the final pass is obviously a validation that it does work, and that's when it terminates, when it realizes that that's done. Okay, the source code for this will be in the download, and I would suggest that you do sort of just download it, have a play around with it, paste it in, you know, and perhaps try and integrate that into the skeleton code if you've got access to that, obviously. Yeah, in the next episode I'm going to talk more about sort of splitting the code up into separate subs and sort of like a more sort of organizational thing, and also some other elements of object-oriented programming. Obviously I can't go into too much detail on that until after comp 1 is out of the way, because then it'll just be like head equals confused. Yeah, I will say that's it for this episode. I may upload the next episode later on in the day, depending on what time this thing gets finished and rendered and stuff. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Please do comment, rate, subscribe, as always. Bye.